Hello everyone and welcome. If you like illusion numbers, this video is for you and we will start with a riddle. How do you think the owners of Chelsea lost more than 1.1 billion euros in 2 years? And yet Chelsea, in its latest financial report, shows profits of about 140 million euros. I remind you of the problem. The issue is as follows. The owners of Chelsea, with the company they created for this purpose, lose more than 1.1 billion over the last 2 years, including Chelsea, Strasbourg and everything. And yet, on Chelsea's latest report, we see more than 140 million. A little idea in this issue worthy of the great Houdini that even Gerard Lopez and John Tector didn't dare. The owners of the Blues have achieved almost the unthinkable by selling some things to themselves and proudly showing it to the authorities. Welcome to the Blues makeover. So, forgive the slight echo, I had to film indoors, it was too windy on the terrace, but obviously we're going to bring out the board because it's quite exceptional. And before we get into the tricks, we're going to recall some economic and political realities at Chelsea because you will see that the two are intrinsically linked. We had mentioned, as you have surely seen, this absolutely outrageous transfer policy, especially regarding the amount on certain transfers. Let's remember that the first year they spent more than 600 million in purchases. You heard right. The following year it was more than 400 million. Simply put, the first 2 seasons of the Blues, it's approximately 1.1 billion euros spent in purchases. Knowing that the second year they still sold for more than 200 million. And this summer they decreased. So actually it was about 650, 430, I think. And this last year we must be around 250, 260, and they sold for between 220 and 240. So we still notice there are more and more sales and at higher prices. Nevertheless, the prices are still a bit lower. We buy less in bulk, even if there are transfers that we might imagine as superfluous given the number of young prospects to Chelsea. Why do I say it's an economic problem? Because some values have been completely exceeded. So we remember, it's with years of fantastic contracts. That's for depreciation, you know? Because actually, I repeat for those who don't know, let's say you sign for 40 million and you get a 10-year contract. Well, basically, on your financial statement, it will be 40 divided by 10. So basically, you write off 4 million per year. Well, if there are salaries, commissions, but basically, it's so everyone can understand. So we're really in that mindset, knowing they have pushed the envelope like almost no one, I want to say. And yet, despite this, there's a lot of politics too. Because remember, they poached a sporting director from Leipzig. He lasted only a few months. Why? Because we have a very, very strong presidential power and a very, very strong shareholder power. However, remember, there is a war within the shareholders. And so each has their own people to sometimes hinder the other in this influence battle. Primarily to make players that one of the shareholders desires. This power struggle is particularly between Todd Boehly and Vedat Ekbali. I might be pronouncing it wrong. It's public, you know. Bloomberg revealed it months and months ago, other press articles, and from my inquiries I can confirm it's very tense. Todd Boehly in particular relies on Laurence Tia, I believe, who was previously in Monaco, knowing that, well, let's say his shareholder and his co-shareholder and rival also have their own people. So it's very, very complicated, and you ask yourself what the real room for maneuver is for the coach and for the people who are supposed to manage the sports. We know that especially the big transfers, or even others. And well, it's Boehly who supposedly has a bit of the upper hand at that level, who imposed them. At first it was fine, but now with egos, and also some potential financial losses, it raises some doubts along with sports results. So well, maybe this year there will be a Conference League, maybe a qualification in the Champions League, which is more than necessary. You will see it financially. But it's true that since their arrival, when they took over, there was still a lot to do. But now, as we will immediately analyze financially, it still raises questions for men who have succeeded in business, who are worth billions. So we know that football is a completely different industry. But now it's necessary to explain the economic logic. I'm bringing out a chart so people understand. So you agree, Chelsea and Strasbourg have the same owner. They have created a company. I believe it's called 22 Holco, something like that. Now, that's its name. So it's the parent company that manages both. Well, it's the player exchanges, the this, the that. Okay, except, in fact, it's this company that ultimately pays. Except this company, as we said, over the last 2 years, it has more than 1.1 billion of deficits. The first year, it was more than 700 million, I believe, almost. And the second, at least 4. We are at more than 1.1, so it's absolutely colossal. However, as I told you, Chelsea, because you know, there are the financial fair play rules in the Premier League regarding UEFA and all, they show on their latest financial report more than 140 million. So it seems a little bit curious. So how did they manage to do that? Well, actually, and understand the trick. This company, the parent company that owns Chelsea and Strasbourg itself, it has what are called subsidiaries underneath. Okay? It has other companies that belong to the same owner. You agree on the chain. And so actually, the idea is to say that part of Chelsea, that Chelsea has the men's team, the training center, the women's team, you'll understand why, and also had real estate assets, notably 2 hotels. Okay, so all that belongs to the club of Chelsea. And in fact, what they did, since Chelsea was also incurring losses, is they notably sold the hotels. There were 2 hotels at Stamford Bridge for about 85 million euros. They sold them knowing that Chelsea was more inclined to sell. And in fact, the ones who bought them are actually a company that belongs to the parent company. So basically, the parent company, so the owners, Billy and all, have sold it back to themselves through another company, the 2 hotels. Except that the hotels belong to Chelsea. So on Chelsea's balance sheet, well, they don't have them anymore. So you no longer see 85 million euros. You understand the idea a little bit? I think you get the idea. Basically, I am an owner. I've created several companies, and I see that my company, Chelsea, is losing a lot of money. But if it loses too much money, it may potentially face sanctions from the Premier League, UEFA, and all that. So to generate revenue, I will sell a Chelsea asset, but it's still mine in the end. I sell it to myself through another company, so that on Chelsea's balance sheet, well, I'm 85 million up, and they took it even further because the Chelsea women's team, they sold it to themselves for 240 million euros. You heard correctly. A women's football team. So they said yes, but for the valuation, they based it on Angel City, I believe, which is in the United States, which had sold for about $200 million or something like that. So they said that was more or less the benchmark value. So I repeat, they self-sold the Chelsea women's team, so they took it out of Chelsea's accounts, let's say from male Chelsea, let's say from the Chelsea company. And so basically, well, you see what? You see the plus 85 million from the hotels and plus 240 million euros from this sale of Chelsea women. Except that, in fact, it's still the same owner. So it's a kind of game, to put it very simply, so that people understand well. Let's say on the scale of debts, let's say on Chelsea's deficit, they reported it at the highest, to the level of the parent company. Because actually Chelsea and Strasbourg, they are companies, they are football clubs, but they are companies above all that belong to 22 Holdco. So in fact, they sold, if I'm not mistaken, I noted it up there, to Blueco 22 Media Limited. So Medco Limited, which is a company that belongs to that, which is now the owner for 240 million. Chelsea's women's team. So you might say, but the value is completely overestimated. We agree. And that's why the Premier League apparently has been dragging its feet a little, hasn't said anything about the fact that basically they generate revenue by selling things to themselves, which is quite an exceptional sleight of hand. But it's mainly about the valuation. How do you justify that a women's football team is worth that much? It's not possible. Do you realize that they sold the women's team to themselves for 3 times the price they bought Strasbourg, which is in League One? You might play in a future European Cup in more. Economically, we know very well that there is an abyssal gap between women's and men's football. And even if women's teams are starting to win economically, they lose a lot of money. So it is obviously a completely overvalued figure. Obviously, there is discontent. UEFA is not happy because it says that this might be a subterfuge. And so here is how the owners of Chelsea today say, but look, Chelsea is in the green because they sold things to themselves with values potentially quite different from reality. But it doesn't stop there economically. And it's very interesting because the Group 22 Holdco, they borrowed to do all that, you see. They borrowed approximately 1.3 billion euros. Yes, you heard correctly, with interest rates from 7.7 to 11.96%, which means that last year they paid more than 94 million pounds, about 110 million euros in interest in 1 year. I repeat, they borrowed so much that per year, it's 110 million interest. I don't know if you realize. So yes, you might say it's a big group. They still have plenty of projects and everything. They have player assets, as they say. But economically, I still have a hard time understanding. Have they not gone too far? Then you might say, but if they go to the Champions League, yes, it will bring in a lot of money for Chelsea. That will be great. But Strasbourg, as we've seen, also loses a lot of money. So yes, you gain in valuation. Is the idea to say, I create this big group, Chelsea, Strasbourg, players, etc., and I increase its value to potentially sell it because you say it has gained in value? It's a question. It's a question. But economically, there might be experts potentially watching this video. But does it make sense in the medium and long term, given the economic difficulties of the group that has lost more than 1.1 billion in 2 years? Meanwhile, waiting for the outcome of this story, because as I keep repeating, UEFA was quite displeased. So will there potentially be a sanction? We don't know. And the Premier League, which is studying whether the value of the women's team is real or has been overestimated. I think that we don't really need a study for that. We're going to wish the Blues good luck, because more than ever, it's necessary for them to qualify for the Champions League. And I know some will tell me yes, but they are betting on the future. They have a lot of young players. They have a certain value, etc. Yes, but unfortunately, when you don't play, sometimes your value also drops. And okay, it's very good. They're starting to have more and more players and all, but it's not just about transfers. And you can't rely solely on your economic activity for that. Football is somewhat of a mirage. We are dealing then with very intelligent people who have made fortunes here and there in the field. The problem here is that they are stepping into a field they do not master. And that's why we've seen so many overpriced transfers. And here, we can still question the long-term economic model of this company that owns Strasbourg and Chelsea. Nevertheless, good luck to both clubs for qualifying for the European Cup, and we'll see you soon on the channel. Keep the faith.